It felt rough, almost damp, like stone. He stood up cautiously, reaching out in front of him, trying to find his bearings. His fingers met nothing but air. He took a step forward, then another. But the room stretched on. There should have been a wall by now, the door, but there was nothing. The darkness seemed to pulse around him, thick and oppressive. Panic clawed at his throat. He fumbled for his phone in his pocket and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, but only barely. The walls were no longer there. The room seemed to have expanded into something vast, something impossible. The light illuminated nothing but cold, empty space. His breath quickened, and a cold realization crept into his mind. He was no longer in his bedroom. Suddenly, the light flickered and died. The darkness closed in again, but now it wasn't just an absence of light, it was alive. It pressed against him, heavy and suffocating, a palpable presence. Jacob turned, but there was no sense of direction. His pulse raced, every breath feeling thick in his throat. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Then he heard it. A low, scraping sound. Like something dragging across the stone floor. It was distant, barely audible, but it was getting closer. Jacob stood frozen, his ears straining to pinpoint the noise. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate, closing the distance between them. "Who's there?" His voice trembled, swallowed by the oppressive blackness. No response, just the relentless sound of something dragging closer. His breath hitched, and he turned, running blindly into the void. He couldn't see, couldn't feel anything except the cold air rushing past his face. He ran for what felt like minutes, hours. Time stretched and twisted in the dark. Then he hit something. A wall finally. He slammed into it, his hands desperately feeling for a door, a handle, anything. But there was nothing but the slick, wet surface of the stone. He banged his fists against it, screaming for help. The sound echoed, swallowed by the vastness. The scraping sound grew louder now, closer. It was coming from behind him. Jacob turned slowly, dread wrapping around him like a vice. His phone flickered back to life, casting a dim, shaky light onto the floor. And then he saw it. A figure stood just a few feet away, hunched and twisted. Its limbs were unnaturally long, dragging along the floor as it moved. The thing's head jerked toward him, and where there should have been eyes, there were only hollow, empty sockets. Its mouth hung open, a gaping void, emitting a low, guttural growl. Jacob couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature stretched one long, bony arm toward him, fingers curling like talons. The scraping sound was its nails against the stone. He stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The wall behind him offered no escape, no refuge. The creature's growl deepened, and it lunged forward, closing the distance in an instant. Jacob screamed as the darkness swallowed him. When the police finally broke into Jacob's apartment, they found his bed neatly made, his phone lying on the pillow. But Jacob was gone. The only trace of him was a smear of blood on the wall and the faint sound of scraping barely audible, but there, lurking in the silence. Please subscribe me channel. Let me know how that one felt.